What stands out to me about themes over time of navigating uncertainty or growth or opportunity is, one, I'm constantly thinking about where is the team and where are the individuals in the team on the journey. And this is what hiring managers are looking for too. Where are you going to crush it? Because I'm looking for you to add value. And can you learn and grow here? Because I'm not hiring you for 1 minute, 1 day, or 1 year in most cases. In order to be deep in e-commerce and a dedicated site, I needed to go down the rabbit hole of education. And so this is where I did follow traditional technologically enabled learning opportunities, listening to performance marketing podcasts because we marketed on the internet, going deep on supplements and the regulations that are different than food and beverage. There were a few things actually that were very new to me. One was solely owned e-commerce. The second was a subscription business. AG1 is a daily health drink, and as a result lends itself to a subscription. And then maybe the most stark of the differences is it's a single product company.
Kat Cole, CEO of AG1, welcome to Change Order.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Excited to have you. One thing that when I think about both of our journeys, and I've known you for quite a while, both of us experienced, I think, some adversity earlier on in our lives. And when it comes to founders or executives overcoming crisis and being good wartime CEOs or wartime executives, do you think that's innate or do you think that's something they can learn?
Oh, it can be learned, but it takes intentionality. And I've had this question, interestingly, when I've spoken at some top tier universities and business schools. And in those programs, you often have people who are, first generation in college, such inspirational stories. And then you have other people who are like legacy, whatever you call it, students in that institution. And I've had them come up to me, which I think takes a lot of courage, and say, look, I haven't had that hard of a life. Am I screwed? Because, I don't have that fire. I'm like, no. It is learnable. But what is required to teach it is to put yourself in situations where you are unpopular. Unpopular. And I choose that word very specifically. I didn't say uncomfortable. Unpopular. And then there's a few other words. Unfamiliar. You don't have relationships. Be the new person. Right? The cousins of whatever unfamiliar, unpopular, not embedded might be. When people have grown up in a situation where they are un-X, right? Something other than what people in a more comfortable majority in their group are experiencing, it shapes you. For most people, not everyone, but for most people, it builds a level of resilience, grit, humility if you faced rejection. Sets you up pretty well for business, certainly for being a founder. You have had to find sources of your sense of self that go beyond the masses, the mob, who's popular. And if you can make it through those stages and come out loving yourself, not feeling ashamed of your background, but loving yourself, seeing the power and what you've gone through, that's fuel for greatness. So for people who haven't had that shaping them like water weathering a rock, you gotta go put yourself under a pressure washer. There is no shortcut. There are books, there are podcasts, there are leaders who can coach you, absolutely. But there is nothing that will do it more quickly and more deeply than putting yourself in a place where you're not known and you still have to deliver an outcome. And I experienced that when I was very young. I was traveling around the world opening franchises when I was 19 years old. And between 19 and 20, I was in, I don't know how many countries, many. And every time I would go to a new country, I would show up as the official corporate representative there to organize the training for the restaurant to allow it to get prepared to open. And in many cases, get the restaurant fully open. But I'd never met those people in my life. I'd show up, I did not know the hourly employees. Of course, they live in that country, they just got hired. The training team that flew in from all over the country or the world were often people I'd never met before. So now my team, I'm having to build trust, build relationships, get to know them, set expectations, and manage them. Then the team we're training are people we've never met collectively. And we were only there for, on the low end, 20 days, on the high end, 40 days. I'd spend 20 to 40 days in a country to get the restaurant prepared and open. And then once it's open, you leave a training team behind and go to the next one. I had to do that over and over. It was Australia when I was 19, and then it was Mexico when I was 20, Argentina when I was 20. Gatineau, Quebec was a very difficult and interesting one. And so I keep showing up, and I don't have people who know me. I don't have people who are like, oh, that's just Kat. She means well. It's the most brutal leadership mirror when you have to lead a team and they are reacting to you on your surface. And after 2 or 3 or 4 openings, there were certain things that went well consistently that I could say I probably have something to do with that. I'm the only common denominator. And there were definitely things that did not go well. And I'm like, shit, it is either caused by me or happening because I am not doing something that I should be. I am the only common denominator. And the first opening, you're like, it's probably the franchisee. They don't get the concept. And then the second country, like, well, it's a totally different country and culture and the food systems are different here. The outlets are different. Like, it's them, not me. By the third country, you're like, it's me, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, to reiterate what you're saying, I think if people think about someone, a friend that they had growing up who moved around a lot as a kid,
Yeah.
and what they're like today as an adult, the chances are like they're very adaptable and
Yeah.
they understand like EQ and communications because they had to make new friends everywhere they went.
That's right.
And if they didn't have to make new friends anywhere they went, and if they did not successfully make new friends, chances are they've something else that's driving them.
Yep.
And at this point, they're figuring out
That's
another
right.
way.
So what does it look like to shape this? If you're in a company, ask to go lead or be a part of a team you've never met. Volunteer for roles where you're going to be unfamiliar and uncomfortable. And you can imagine all the ways this might show up. Volunteer for a nonprofit. Go knock on doors and fundraise. Anything that you can do to put yourself in a position to be unfamiliar and maybe not someone everyone's welcoming with open arms or that doesn't have the first invitation, and do that a lot and do it often and watch your confidence grow, your calm grow, your grit and resilience. And then you start almost inviting it and looking for it. It's very scary for people who have not experienced a lot of rejection because they think they're bad. They think something's wrong with them. And it can be something people deeply and wrongly internalize instead of, this is just part of the journey. And when you see it that way, it's like, no big deal, doesn't slow me down. One more no is I get that much closer to a yes. But if you haven't experienced that, it's really tough to lead in those environments.
I think I want to highlight something that Josh Koppelman asked me when I had a conversation with him like 6 years ago. And he said, how do you like to learn? Now, to take that even further, if you unpack how somebody came up a curve at whatever job it is that they're at, trying to attack the thing that they don't know, and you hear an answer like that, hire that person right away.
Yeah.
Because like if they are a learning machine, that is exactly what you want in the seat to try to make
Totally.
big decisions day in and day out.
And for years, I've said, learning is my currency. It's why I said yes to going to Australia when I didn't have a passport and had never been on a plane. And that played out many, many times through my career. And it was a little bit of playing into the opportunity with AG1. I could have run much larger companies. I had the opportunity to do so. But there was something about the intersection of a product that I was so deeply passionate about that the more I learned, the more excited I got. The quality was even better than I thought. The opportunity was even bigger than I thought. Right? I only appreciated a slice as a customer. And then meeting the team and seeing the opportunity to push that into the future, seeing an understanding as a mom, as a woman who is heavily marketed to by this industry, where we needed to take the business with investments and science and human clinical trials and quality. Like, it was just so exciting. And it's where I believe the consumer was going, like real health ownership. So to me, while there was this, not hesitation, it was just this question of, wow, the business is smaller than what I've run. I could have run much larger companies, but the opportunity to come in and bring what I know, but to your question, learn. Like, I want it to be hard. I'm not here for easy. That's how people atrophy their brains, their muscles. Like, you atrophy when you don't have hard. You've had Cody Sanchez on the pod, and I just love her. And she always says, choose your hard. I say, the phrase I've used over the years is pick your poison. There will be poison. There will be hard. It will come at you or you will choose it. I'd at least like to have agency over it. So this felt like the right amount of exciting and hard. Type 2 fun, as the endurance community calls it, as I've learned from my husband.
Amazing. Kat, you run AG1 now. It's over $1 billion company. What do you think you've figured out about building teams that other people have not?
I don't know if I figured things out that others haven't, but what stands out to me about themes over time of navigating uncertainty or growth or opportunity is one, I'm constantly thinking about where is the team and where are the individuals in the team on the journey. And by the journey, I mean, what have they been exposed to? Like if we're navigating a macro environment crisis, have they ever lived through that? Do they even have the experience or the reference set to navigate this? So that helps me communicate in a way that leverages wherever people are on the journey to the betterment of their performance and the company. So I'm very thoughtful about people's experience and what they bring to the table, which requires that I know them. And so I do my best. It's tougher in bigger companies, clearly. But to get to know people, to understand what they've been exposed to, where they've been, and to leverage that in coaching, communications, hiring, and leading. So that's one. The other is, again, this is not necessarily a novel insight, but I act on it is all about the team. And the company and the business are only as strong as the weakest links on the team. And so I think about it a lot. I talk to people about their performance, about what the company needs now, what we need in 6 months, what we need in 12 months, and where they are on the journey to deliver that. And then I guess finally is just, I listen, as much as I can. And the first two themes I shared are a lot about delivering or executing or talking or from me to them. But the listen piece is just as important.
You've had a lot of success in recruiting executive talent over the years. A lot of your former employees are now running other large companies.
Yeah, it's very cool.
What do you think it is about your process for selecting executive talent?
Some of the people that I've led, and what's coming to mind is leaders that I led at Focus Brands, where I was for 10 years. And almost every one of my direct reports are now CEOs of companies that are similar size or larger than the brands they ran when they reported into me, which is so cool to see. Maybe a quarter of those were leaders I inherited, so I didn't hire them. Someone else had the insight to bring them to the company, but I coached them, I partnered with them, and in some cases, I helped them exit the company, either by their own choice or ours, and it led to their next great thing. So I think that's important to acknowledge. But there's another big chunk that I did hire, and there's a even deeper pride. When you interviewed someone, you remembered that process, you brought them in, you saw them go through the honeymoon period of being with a company or a leader in a brand, and then watch them mature and navigate what occurs over time, the ups, the downs, not just the fun and the new. And some of them have stayed and taken much larger roles in that company now. They're presidents or group presidents, and others are CEOs of big businesses. So out of both of those groups, some things that come to mind are that idea of helping people know when it's time to double down and when it's time to go. And I don't just mean time to double down or go relative to their employment with the company. I mean investments, killing your darlings in the business, being incredibly thoughtful and intentional about where we invest, what fires to let burn, when to pound the table, when to support them, when to argue with them and help them see a different perspective. So I guess what just comes to mind is just being in it with them and celebrating their strengths and putting them in a position to be successful, but being the person, the partner, the coach that will tell them things that other people won't tell them, that will tell them they have spinach in their teeth and boogers in their nose and that they shouldn't have said what they said in a meeting because it's not serving them. And to do the opposite when it's warranted as well, which is to celebrate them, to put them on a platform to showcase their talents and make a bigger impact to the company.
You mentioned earlier that listening is a huge part of the job. And I imagine that there's a lot of listening once you're already managing someone and understanding where they come from and why they behave in the ways that they do. How much of that comes in the recruiting process as well?
A lot. Not just listening to the recruit or the talent that I'm interviewing, but listening deeply to references, people who've worked with them, asking questions that help me get insight into something deeper. So one of my favorite questions to ask, especially for senior talent, and this is even more important if I'm interviewing someone that's been at a much larger company than the one I'm interviewing them for, which happens a lot in venture-backed company. You want talent that's been where you're going. in many cases, not all. And yet there's a downside to that, because if they've been where you're going to a larger scale or to a state of greater maturity, they are accustomed to usually a different set of resources. And so I like this question, which is the if not for question. So I ask about their skills, what they've accomplished, their results. And then I ask them to break it down. What were the key enabling resources that you recall having access to? And tell me about those. Tell me about your team. Tell me about the technology. Tell me about the access to data. Tell me about the research, whatever it might be. And then I want you to think about if you didn't have those things or didn't have them to that degree, how do you think your results might have been altered? If not for those enablers, how might your performance have been altered? Or said another way, how else would you have gotten to the result? So I'm looking for resourcefulness. I'm looking for humility and respect. I'm also looking for, are they going to understand when they come to this company? Are they going to be able to identify certain things that aren't present that they need? Do they even know what enabled them in some cases? And these aren't deal breakers, but they help me create a match between very senior talent and what might be an earlier stage company or team.
I find that to be a huge issue in early stage startups. Yeah. They go out and they recruit someone and they only ask about, oh, what did you accomplish? And not actually around the how did you accomplish it?
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many people come in and like they did well in their last job, but then when they don't have the resources, implementing new data infrastructure or the tools, even the tools that they used at their last job, like feels like it's a Herculean task.
Of course, there are variants, but one of two major paths or scenarios. One is they come in and just try to build an empire, which is not financially prudent for potentially an earlier stage business. So they just want to go from 0 to 100. They want to build exactly what they had. Then you have the other path, which is they are so unaware of the enablers that they come in and they are delusional about their ability to deliver whatever it is they think they can. And then there's a massive culture clash over time, because sometimes it's culture or it's simply the funding mechanism of the company. And I've seen this so much in consumer, where if someone comes from a company that's had retail stores as a key driver, and e-com was this business that they oversaw or contributed to, but it wasn't the bread and butter of their company. Then they interview for a company like AG1, which up to this point has been exclusively D2C. Not only exclusively D2C, exclusively our .com, drinkag1.com. And so when that is everything, it is a very different financial animal and operational setup than if you have cash flowing assets that are profit generators that then feed other channels. So it's a small channel example, but I see it in supply chain, data, CTOs, even presidents and COOs who it's almost a heavier burden when they show up to a company if they don't appreciate that gap between resources they've had and resources they may or may not have. And then there's the other side, which is earlier stage, high growth companies have things that are really special that the big ones don't. So it's not just you had a lot of cool stuff and now you don't have these toys. It's, do you respect and understand the differences? And can you use that to your advantage to then lead in that environment at that time while still trying to pull the company forward to the future, which is why you're being interviewed in the first place.
Totally agree. And I want to come back to the AG1 transition in a minute. But when you think about your process of recruiting, is there a question that you feel like you ask that many other people don't ask?
There are a few. One, on the personal level, if I get to that level of interview with someone, and usually we have a deep, sometimes annoying to the candidate, thorough interview panel and process. I mean, there are 7 to 10 people who might interview, especially leaders, because we have people who help us with just a level up perspective. Are they going to really come in and help level up the company? Technical experts in that area. So by the time they're getting to me, depending on the level, I'm trying to dig much more deeply into culture, grit, how are they going to show up? And so one of the questions I'll ask is, tell me someone who's really close to you. Tell me about them. They know you intimately. And usually it's a spouse, a partner, or a best friend. So they tell me about this person. I ask a little bit about them. How do you know them? How'd you meet them? Helps me get to know them as well. And then I'll ask, tell me how they would describe your bookend qualities or characteristics. What is one thing about you that absolutely annoys them to no end. They love you, but it annoys them to no end. And what is the other thing about you that when you're not in the room, they would tell me, this is your magic, this is your superpower? Then I just let them talk and listen. And it's very interesting. It's better than saying, like, what's your strengths and what's your weaknesses and what do you optimize for and what have you heard in your 360 reviews? It tends to create a conversation that I then would bridge to the professional environment. So how does that show up when you don't get what you want in a moment? How does that show up when you have a point of view that is going against the status quo of incumbent leaders or the traditional way the company has shown up? Because often you're bringing someone on to drive change, to drive improvement. So then I'll keep bringing that into how does that show up when? And so that's an interesting one.
I love that. It sounds a lot like the book Top Grading kind of describes, you know,
Totally.
their interview process. And I find too, when I ask founders that question, like how would your friends describe you, you know, your strengths, your weaknesses, it also shows off a level of self-awareness or lack thereof.
Totally.
Which feels very important when it comes to hiring or investing in founders.
Yes. I can remember once at a very senior executive, someone interviewing for an SVP role who really struggled to answer the question. And only one person out of however many interviews. And, you know, again, none of these questions are deal breakers necessarily. Sometimes you go, maybe they're nervous, right? You give people the benefit of the doubt, but it disables my ability to draw out what I need to see to make a confident decision.
Ideally, though, they've been reflecting on those types of things throughout the course of their career, if they're at the level that they're interviewing with you to be an executive, I would say.
When I was running restaurants and opening stores and a much younger leader, interviewing much more entry-level talent, and even then I asked a version of this question. It just has slightly different implications in how you pull it through.
You mentioned deal breakers. What are some of the red flags that pop up in the interview process?
One red flag is when I'm going into this bucket of if not for questions, if I don't see a level of humility and or even curiosity about enablers for their outcomes, especially if they're a leader, especially if they're someone who has to work deeply cross-functionally across the company, that's a red flag. Another, which feels obvious, and you would think you would only see this at more entry levels of roles, but I've seen it at very senior levels where, let's say someone's interviewing for a customer experience role, and they are going to fill a role where they are going to manage and improve the entire customer journey. And I'll ask a question, and their answer makes it very clear to me that they have barely even gone on the site and gone through the customer journey themselves. And so when there's not that chutzpah, that initiative, that ownership mentality, you contrast that with the other side that's major green flags, where people have gone through the site, talked to customers, taken video, done testimonials. I mean, the contrast of effort, just effort that says, I'm really interested in this. I want it. I'm hungry. But it's also a sign of just obsession with your craft. And so when that's not present, or is very weak or light, it is a deal breaker for me. It's a red flag, a purple flag, whatever is the worst flag, because I put it against the many times where I see people do the opposite. And this is the interview, right? This is when you're supposed to be like winning friends and influencing people. And so if you're not showing up with that level of, it is an entrepreneurial spirit, it is an owner mentality and owner mindset, that's not going to work on our team. It may work somewhere else. It's not going to work on our team.
One thing I think a lot of founders struggle with, though, is, you know, you're an early stage founder, you're maybe post Series A, post Series B, and you're like, okay, I'm going to go hire a chief revenue officer.
Yeah.
And you're going out and you're doing outbound and you're networking and you try to find somebody who is maybe out of your league, you know, and I'll throw air quotes up.
Yep.
How much work should they really be doing in the interview process versus you trying to sell them?
Usually it's a bit of a dance if someone's a bit of a stretch, of course. Sometimes the selling them has a lot to do with convincing that incredible talent that the company is solid, on a great trajectory, that it's not more of a risk than they may perceive, right? So that part, I do believe founders should be able to do an excellent job of selling the dream, the vision, the mission, and where are we at this stage so you can make a decision eyes wide open. On the other side, once you get into that, if that candidate's comfortable, then it should be more sell and tell versus the pull and convince, especially after a second or third interview. If you're getting to that point where you're having dinner and you're talking and you feel like you're begging, for lack of another term, or pleading for them to come, there's a difference between inspiring and convincing and having a disproportionate interest in the match of the talent to the role.
In many ways, I think a good interview process and a good recruitment process goes from a pull, where you're pulling the executive in, trying to get them interested in what you're doing, to a push process.
That's right.
Where they should be doing the pushing to try to get the job.
Totally.
And it doesn't matter about the level, honestly,
No,
right?
that's right.
I was talking to your husband daily, and he had mentioned that probably your biggest strength is that you are an amazing wartime CEO and somebody who handles crisis very well versus peacetime.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't lived in peacetime in quite a while, so.
What is it about leading in crisis that gets you going, and how do you become successful when it comes to leading in crisis?
I made the joke about, I don't know if I've been in peacetime, because many, many years ago, I learned to redefine crisis, because I've seen what real crisis is. I've done humanitarian work in Eastern Africa. I've been with people and teams experiencing deep loss. That's real crisis. But in terms of the wartime CEO analogy, I have learned to reframe crisis, not only as a very real, imminent threat that either our company or our industry or our consumer are facing. And so, yes, I'm very good in those moments. But I've also learned to redefine a moment that might not be an obvious crisis to other people, but make it very clear that if we don't do X, we will be facing some type of deep, deep challenge. And it's tough to get people motivated when things are, in some cases, when things are really, really good. Because, of course, like most of the things we're doing are probably leading to things being good. But in fact, you might be having a great quarter, a great season, a great year, driven by factors that are actually not of your doing. I remember when I was a waitress, I was a Hooters girl, and there was a manager, a general manager, and I remember the corporate office coming in their khakis and their polos with their Hooters logo and their clipboards, and they were giving this guy like the manager of the quarter award. And he was awful. Awful. No one liked working on shifts with him. We had many great managers, by the way. So he stood out as being just a poor people leader, a poor communicator. He was always out back, like one of those. And so here comes the corporate office celebrating this guy. Why was he being given the manager of the quarter award? Because sales had been up quarter after quarter in this location. Sales up equaled manager good. In fact, there was just a ton of construction going on around this particular location. And construction workers like chicken wings, and they love the concept. The restaurant was busy not because there was a great GM. In fact, there were people quitting left and right. The assistant managers, who were fantastic, were on the verge of leaving. He made their jobs very difficult. If you were in the business, you saw that he was actually impairing sales, being even higher, and probably affecting profitability to the negative at that stage, but he was being celebrated. And so, of course, things look good. So no one would call that a crisis. No one would say there's a management problem, but there was a deep management issue in that business. So in that situation, if the regional manager had been closer, had been more involved, they would have gone in and, despite sales being up, said, we have a problem. We need to replace this manager. We have a crisis on our hands. And acting with the motivation of that would be driven by the potential of the bad stuff that could happen, or taking seriously how much better it should be and the opportunity cost that's missed. So while I am a very strong, experienced wartime CEO, someone who can navigate a ton of uncertainty and bring calm, clarity, and progress, I've also learned I don't want to only lead tough things at tough times. I want to help people be motivated in the same way, even when things are going quite well. And I've been running a company where things have been going quite well for a long time. But if you're in our meetings, if you're in our team, you would feel a wartime energy that is focused on how much better we should be. Continuous improvement. What are we still missing? What do our customers deserve that is even more than we're doing today? And I remember, and I've gone through a few very literal industry, what people would call wartime. So one would be the Great Recession. I was an executive leading restaurant companies at that time. I was a young executive, but I was in the boardrooms, and it was incredibly difficult. Then certainly COVID is another example of that, where I was running franchises in restaurants and the industry was decimated. I mean, 100% of our revenue disappeared overnight. A multi-billion-dollar revenue, not valuation, revenue company evaporated. We had some corporately owned restaurants and a few large franchisees, but mostly small to mid-size operators who were in different cities, different countries, different legislations, whether it was masks, gloves, sanitizing, hours of operation, dine in, dine out. It was just a mess. There was no clarity. If there were moments of clarity, they were micro and they were very localized. They could not be translated to the level of like organizational clarity that people are accustomed to. And so in those moments, what I've leaned on is this ability to just get really clear of what are the few things that are the most important. In the case of the pandemic and the restaurant industry and having your entire demand gone, was we have two priorities or two top focuses. One is people and the other is cash. That is it. If what you are bringing to me does not optimize the outcomes for both of those right now, or one very strongly, not at the expense of the other, I'm not talking to you. No one's talking to you. Not the email, not the call. Like, you just have to be that clear. And then make it clear all the way throughout the organization, because how they care for people and cash is very different in their role versus me with the private equity firm and the CEO at the time. I was the president and COO. And the presidents of the brands that I managed, 9 presidents dealing with this. So this clarity and then sturdy leadership. Sturdy leadership doesn't mean robot. It doesn't mean not emotive. There were many times I was teary on calls, that I cried at night, because you just feel the weight of the wartime. You feel it, and you have to feel it. And if there's not an indication that you feel it, it's also very unsettling for people, because then they think, are you not experiencing this the way that I am? Are you insulated in a way that I'm not? And that certainly showed up with franchisor relationships globally during this time. So clear priorities, what are we optimizing for? Sturdy leadership, humanity, and then just executing against that and communicating. I have learned to be a thorough communicator, and there are times where that can be a little much, but for the most part, it builds teams who trust a leader, even amidst an environment where the leader doesn't have the answers either.
How do those communications actually cascade down in the organization? And like, what does over communicating actually look like in your day-to-day?
As I often tell people, where they're like, I'm so worried about saying too much or over communicating. I'm like, most people are pretty far from that line. So
Very.
Yeah. If you have that problem, congratulations, you get a gold star. I'll bring you a cappuccino. Like, you've earned your right to the next level of the leadership simulation. So what over communication might look like, where I actually see it happen, and I've been guilty of this as well, is frequent communication on a topic where it is past time to shift gears and move on. One of the responsibilities of a leader is to be that thermostat, not the thermometer. So set the temperature, set the initiative, get people going, push a little more. If the leader doesn't, who will? Usually the answer is very few people within the organization. They either don't know how or they don't have the authority to. And again, especially if things are going well, they don't have that motivation to do it. So there are times where when you are communicating, here's what we know now, here's what we're doing about it, here's what's possible. When things are tough, especially if they're heavy, emotionally heavy, positivity, which can be like toxic positivity or like false positivity, is not what people want. They want possibility, they want clarity, they want grounding, they want to know their experience is seen and understood, because then if it is seen and understood, then whatever decisions we're making, take that into context. And then they want to move the F on. But not everyone moves on at the same pace. So it's the leader's job to go, all right, I've communicated about where we are and what we're doing and why up to this point. And there could be 10% of the company, especially larger companies, where they haven't heard it, or they've only heard it 2 times. And we as humans, I forgot the stat, but we need to hear things like 5 to 7 times for it to even sink in. So in a larger company, communications are not a monolith. There will always be people who are tired of hearing, reading, seeing. And then there will be people who will say, I have no idea what's going on. And you're trying to strike the optimal balance of the healthy, chunky 80%. And then you move people on. You can't wait until the 3,053rd person in the organization has heard something 7 times. Now everybody knows. Now we're going to communicate the next level. So one of the mistakes I see is not shifting gears, not moving along. And it's such a hard thing to do as a human being, because even in wartime, when you get in this communication muscle, or maybe not wartime, people might think of it as an exciting time in the company, launching a new channel, an acquisition, a divestiture, a RIF, right? Big things that require a lot of communication. Sometimes you get in that communication rhythm and it feels like you should just keep doing more. And it is time to move on. So one piece of coaching I give to people and that I've learned in these circumstances is you let people know you're moving on. You say, we've covered these topics. Here's where the information is stored. This is what we know about where we are. You're like naming the thing.
Yeah.
Now we're going to shift gears and start focusing on this next step. And that helps people move more quickly. Yeah, you could be a little more of a bull in a porcelain shop and be like, I don't care about these snowflakes. We're just going to go and do it. I actually care about the effectiveness of people when leaders aren't in the room. And so naming the change, saying we're going to stop this, we're going to start this. If someone feels they're not brought along or they're not sure, here's who you call, here's who you email, here's who you Slack, here's where the information is kept. So that is a risk of over communicating. Again, most people are very far from this line, but if you're at that point, have truth tellers around you that will say, we got it. We need to focus on, in the case of the pandemic in restaurants, we got in this protection mode. Again, cash and people, cash and people. We can actually be open. We've built the systems years ago to accelerate revenue, because we invested in third-party delivery before most people. We invested in technology. We altered the operating systems. We built family meal menus. I want to say coincidentally, but I'm going to give us a lot more credit than that. Thoughtfully, intentionally, strategically, because we saw what was happening with different channels in the food service industry. So when everyone was shut down and then we opened up, we were one of the few sets of brands and franchises that day one were ready to operate with channels that were the preferred or only legally allowable channels. So delivery, pickup, right? A lot of places where fast casual, go through the line, dine. That was 100% of our concepts. 100% of our locations were ready to operate day one, as soon as they could legally be open. So I had to shift from holding people's hands and calming them and at the uncertainty to, here's how we're going to operate. Here are the staffing schedules. Here are the best practices. Here's the new menu change. Right, you shift gears. And there's always someone who's going to say, but you're not sensitive to the people who are still struggling. But on the other hand, there are people who are like, you're focusing on that way too long. There's opportunity over here. Let's move so we get ahead of it. And it's the leaders and leadership team's role to have their boots on the ground and their tentacles in the business, consumers, sentiment, operators, market, to just go, this is the time. And I'd rather be a little early than a little late.
I mean, in many ways, there's usually 3 reasons that employees fail, right? They either don't know what to do, they don't know how to do it, and they don't know why they're doing it.
Yeah.
And it feels like when you're shifting that communication rhythm and trying to move on from whatever the crisis is, really dialing in on the why
Totally.
is like the key to success.
Absolutely.
One of the things when I think about the story you just told also about at Hooters, that manager that was bad and was successful in spite of himself, I think about the fact that a lot of people question whether or not to do skip level meetings and, jump over the manager into the person below them. Are you a big advocate for skip level meetings?
Big advocate. Again, I'll go back to my restaurant days. My first corporate job, I was 20 years old. I'd moved to Atlanta. Now I had the polo and the clipboard, and I was going into restaurants to audit them. And I remember meeting managers who were very open door, right? Come on in, whatever you see, I want to get better. And then I remember managers who were like, whoa, like, why are you going in there? What are you doing in the walk-in freezer? What do you need? Let me know. I'll get it. And as a young leader, that was a very interesting set of experiences where, Ken, you're forming your confidence. And I had to remember I have a job to do. I'm here to do a job. It helps keep people safe. It helps level up the quality and the experience of the brand. But there were times that these were some of the best general managers, and I wanted to be a good partner to them. I wanted them to see me as a partner in the training department. There were a few in the early days where I'd be like, okay, could you tell me the temperature of that chicken? Not a good idea. Like, I'm supposed to take the temperature of the chicken. And there were times that played out not to my benefit. So I learned early lessons about asking questions and talking to team members. Then as I developed my confidence and moved through restaurants and then QSR, and now as I move up as a leader, I'm a president, or in the case of Focus Brands, COO of the parent company. I manage 9 brand presidents. They have executive teams that they manage. They have leaders. Then we have franchisees. So think about the distance between me and the customer ordering a Jamba Juice smoothie. Massive. I operated and still do with a healthy fear that I don't actually know what's going on. And as a result, skip level meetings or talking to the people doing the work is a non-negotiable for me. But what I did learn, especially in that franchise era of my life, is there's a lot of people who have roles and layers of management between me and those people. And my goal is not to disempower them, to communicate or convey mistrust. And so back to naming the thing, I'd say, this is what I'm doing. I'm talking to your people. Here's the questions I ask. I want complete access. I will never use the information I have for evil, right? Only for good. And unless someone is breaking the law or violating something or doing something that puts safety at risk, I'm going to handle it in a thoughtful and mature way. I mean, I'll always be thoughtful and mature, but I'll keep people's confidences. You don't have to worry about me coming back and causing problems in the managerial hierarchy. I know how to handle information. When I was new in each company, that took time to build that trust. When I was early, I'd have to say, this is how I operate. And you just have to know it allows me to have insights that reflect the reality of the business, so I am a better partner for you. Now that I'm in a different type of business, a company that's fully remote, never had a headquarters in 14 years, it's less about the layers between me and them, as it's hundreds of people. I've managed, hundreds of thousands in the layers of the company. And so this is a much smaller set of humans, but we're fully remote. And so the skip levels or the touch bases or the check-ins are equally as important for different reasons.
Underlying all of that feels like the important piece here is assuming positive intent.
Totally.
And recognizing that like sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Yes.
and I do think that founder mode, as a lot of people talk about, is exactly what you're describing.
Exactly.
But as somebody who comes in that might not have been the founder and becomes CEO or an executive, all of a sudden people are on edge and they're thinking like, am I going to have a job next week?
One way to build this trust is when you're doing skip levels or having conversations with different stakeholders in the company is be very conscious of what you do with that information and tip the scales toward doing more positive with the information than negative. So instead of coming back and saying, hey, I talked to this person, this is a problem, make sure it's, I talked to this person and here's something they brought up and I'm really pleased to see this moving in that direction, or I think other people should hear about this. When that happens, it's more balanced and it feels truly partnering instead of investigative for the purpose of catching something that might be hidden from you. It's like, oh, I need to support my team better. And this helps me have the perspective. And I would include beyond skip levels, constant customer conversations. Our team talks to our customers. And just like talking to our customer happiness team, our managers, our engineers, our marketers, our science, our quality people, our manufacturing teams, talking to customers, when you put that all in, it just helps keep your feet on the ground, especially founders or founder-oriented CEOs or ownership-oriented CEOs. We are setting the vision. It is about believing in what's possible and marshaling resources around that in a way that you can execute. But it can also pull your feet off the ground. And talking to people who are at various points in the business in equal balance, customers, keeps your feet on the ground. So you don't get too in your head. You don't get ivory tower syndrome. You're not talking to yourself as a company or with corporate initiatives. It's like people want a shaker bottle that doesn't leak. So let's focus on that, not the future loyalty program. How about that? And that is literally an experience I had when I first joined AG1. But it came from talking to customers and people. It's not that leaders didn't have visibility or awareness. It's that so many other big things at scale were also going on that were incredibly positive and had a lot of inertia. And when there's a lot of momentum behind other things, it's very easy to ignore little things that can become big things that your employees are experiencing or that your customers are experiencing.
I mean, embedding customer obsession into your culture intentionally feels so important. And I want to highlight one thing that you said that aligns very well with a lot of studies in psychology, which is if you go in and you provide 5 compliments, you're gaining credibility with the person that you're working with, and then you can give them 1 negative. But if you only do like the 1-to-1 ratio, it's going to be really hard to win somebody over.
That's right. And over time, that what people call the compliment sandwich or the Oreo cookie or the whatever has been disproven because it doesn't feel genuine, which means as a leader, you also have to look for more of the positive.
And be specific.
And be very specific. I remember listening to a management speaker. His books and his content never became as popular as the greats of what are more common. But his name was Bruce Tolgan. Never heard of him, probably. Look him up. It's interesting. And he wrote a few books and had a few acronyms that were so helpful to me. They were kind of big in the restaurant industry in the early 2000s. And one was HOT management, which was hands-on transactional. So hands-on, you're in the weeds. And then when people say, well, I want a day off, it's like, here's what I need from you. When people say, well, what about Julie? She's getting this. It's like, well, here's what Julie's doing. What are you doing? Like, you're really driving performance. And then the other was the acronym FAST for feedback: frequent, accurate, specific, and timely. And the S, the specific, was supposed to be the antidote for you're doing a good job, you're doing a bad job. Great work today. Too general, to your point of specific, saying, I saw you do this. This is what I love. Here's the value that adds to the company. I'd like to see you do this more often. Send a voice note, send a Slack note. Like in the moment, it's specific and it's actionable, as opposed to great job today. The problem with great job today, not that it's wrong to say that to someone, but you're not optimizing behavior as a result, is people may associate the wrong part of the day to what was a great job. And they may under-optimize for a very specific thing that you're like, we need more of that in this company, or I want to see more of that from you.
I want to talk about unfamiliar and uncomfortable for a second. You were an advisor for AG1 before you ended up joining as president and COO. When I think about world-class e-commerce companies, I don't think about the brands that you used to run.
Yeah.
So how did you climb the learning curve as being executive at an e-commerce company like AG1?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. My companies were like the ones we talked about earlier, where this particular channel was an and. You know, it was, the business would have been just fine without it. Maybe not relevant over time, but the core of the business was driven by non-e-commerce channels. And so to move to a company where 100% of the business is e-commerce and no marketplaces, only our site, was a massive learning curve. There were a few things actually that were very new to me. One was solely owned commerce, e-commerce. The second was a subscription business. AG1 is a daily health drink, and as a result, lends itself to a subscription. It's not one of these like things over here where you try to get people to subscribe. People drink it every day. It's very convenient and more cost effective for them to subscribe. So a massive chunk of the business is subscription. I had never managed that before. And then maybe the most stark of the differences is it's a single product company. And the business will do around $600 million in revenue this year, 4x the business in the last 3 years from one product.
It's amazing.
2 formats, travel packs or pouch. That's about the extent of our variety right now. Although we are stepping into an exciting future where new products and new channels will occur, which is fun. But that was the largest shift. I'm used to having so many levers for growth at my disposal. Right? Brands, day parts, channels, menu types, diverse menus, different items. I mean, thousands of SKUs. When you're in big commercial businesses, if you eke out 5% year-over-year growth, you are a hero. I joined this business and we are growing at hundreds of percent year-over-year. And there's a lot behind that. One, people just love it. They reorder, they tell their friends, it helps them, they drink for a long time, and that compounds. There was also the COVID tailwind, nutrition, awareness, continuing comfort in e-commerce and subscription, which again, fueled by the pandemic, accelerated. So the business model was just built for those tailwinds, but the product is just so high quality, people stick with it. It's not like a normal CPG product where it's like, if you can get someone to buy it a few times a year, you're doing great. What's the repeat rate? This daily health drink is a very different model. And so on one hand, I wrongly thought on the outside, that is going to make things so simple, so easy, which is actually a little bit of a disrespect that I had from the outside, or a lack of appreciation for how complex doing one thing this well at scale really must have been, because I was a customer. I'd been a customer for years before I even met the founder, so I just loved it. And I knew manufacturing from being in food and beverage. I didn't think it was that complex. It's very complex to do it at that quality with that level of third-party certification. And so I get into the business and, I talk to customers, I talk to the team, I have ideas, things I think we should change. When you only do one thing, if you change anything about it, you are affecting everything. And so what I thought was going to be so simple became a need for a level of thoughtfulness and consideration about existing customer ritual that I had never experienced. So then to your question, how do I jump the curve? Like, how do I go through the curve? One is a bit of what you were talking about before. I just went deep, talked to customers nonstop. I was a customer, which helped, and a big fan. I was like chief fangirl of the product. It helped my gut health and energy so much after my second child. And my husband, as you know, is an ultra endurance athlete. And so he was very familiar with like high performance vitamins and supplements, and which was how I heard about it and started drinking it, and helped me after my second child. So I'm a fan, but I get in and go deep with the team and realize, all right, in order to be deep in e-commerce and a dedicated site, I needed to go down the rabbit hole of education. And so this is where I did follow traditional technologically enabled learning opportunities, listening to performance marketing podcasts because we marketed on the internet, going deep on supplements and the regulations that are different than food and beverage, in some cases actually more strict, contrary to popular belief. Going deep in our manufacturing. At the time when I joined, we only had one manufacturer, and the business was growing at hundreds of % in New Zealand. It was very clear we needed to expand manufacturing to the United States to support the North America business and to create redundancy and additional quality in the supply chain. And so I just went deep. I eat, sleep, and breathe these businesses like a founder, like an owner. And I do think this is hopefully a generation of what we're seeing, what used to be like founder and hired guns. And now there's this founding-oriented, owner-oriented chief executive that truly thinks for the long term, like a founder, and eats, sleeps, and breathes the business. And so it was a benefit that I was already a customer. I was already a shopper of e-commerce, but that's the surface. Understanding mechanics took education. So I just went online and talked to people, talked to smart people, asked people if they would be helpful to me, paid attention, talked to investors in the community. When I joined the company, it was bootstrapped. There were no outside investors. We didn't raise our only round until I joined. And that did bring some expertise that I could lean on as well. And certainly the founding team had deep expertise in this business. So it wasn't like I'm here to save the day. The business was going through the roof. I need to learn. So I went deep there. Then on the subscription side, I just became a customer of every subscription that I could find, right? Went through their customer flows, went through their customer journeys, talked to their customer happiness reps, just be deep in the work so that my perspective is not only an interpretation of my previous playbooks. I'm modifying my playbook for this business.
I want to shift gears for a second. One of the things that I think I'm most impressed by you is kind of the balance of work and life that you have, and just the sheer amount of output you have in the hours that we have during the day. How do you optimize your life?
I try to focus first on energy management, overtime management, although they're deeply connected. So what gives me energy? What affects my energy? And that question leads to a few very obvious pillars. One is health. Now, that's very aligned, running a health ownership company and a nutrition company. But I have been focused on this long before AG1. I met my husband a little later in life, had my kids at 39 and 41, had a couple miscarriages in between. My mom had breast cancer the same year she was starting her small business. and many other things, like all of us in life, that are reminded that without our health, almost very little matters. And so I have focused on health, which allows me to navigate the balance you're asking about with more energy and more grace and more calm. One, I have an incredible set of partners in my life. My life partner, my husband, Daly, is just this incredible partner. We live together. We grow together from the time we met. I mean, literally, we met. He rowed across the Atlantic Ocean in a rowboat. We tattooed our rings. We got married at Burning Man. We started having babies. It should be a movie, but we life together. We have monthly check-ins where we go deep in how we're showing up for each other and how things feel and what we want out of each other. We run our home and our life in some ways like a business, and it's far more romantic than that sounds. My business partners, all of them, my team, everything, the ability to manage the balance of all we all do is largely determined by our health and who our partners are in life. And then there's just good operating systems, right? What's the operating system? So whether that's routines in the morning, I wake up, I drink my AG1, I cold plunge, I stretch, I get the kids ready, I eat a high protein breakfast, I move my body, I work out, I have coffee with my husband, I work my ass off, I spend every minute with my kids that I can, and I'm present most of the time. And so operating systems, routines, meal planning, right? Things that just allow me to do what's right for home and work with as little thought as possible.
It sounds like your executive recruiting process is time consuming, takes a little while, and is incredibly methodical. Yet you got engaged to Daly 3 weeks after you met him.
I did. When you know, you know.
What was the difference in that, in building conviction?
I contain multitudes. I'll just say. Interestingly, I had been in an 11-year relationship before I met my now husband. A previous relationship, wasn't married, long-term relationship. He was in an 8-year relationship. He was 29 and I was 36. I didn't know he was 29 whenever everything first went down. But we were both at a stage in life where we had done the long-term relationship thing. We were entering a very exciting chapter in our lives and careers. He was about to row across the Atlantic Ocean in a rowboat. He was an operator at a super hot tech company and had just moved back from London, living in New York, like living his best life. I had gotten out of this 11-year relationship. And honestly, I thought maybe I'll adopt children. I want to have a family, but it doesn't have to happen in a normal way. And maybe I'll have a partner or a lover on multiple continents. Like it's going to be this fabulous life. While I was president of Focus Brands, like I am going to violate the narrative so hard, of a big company leader. And I was loving it. I was so happy where I was at that chapter in my life. I was excited for change and new. And then I met my husband. And there was something about our energy together, where we were at that stage in life, what we wanted out of life, that very quickly we moved from, I don't want anything like this, to I only want this. And I remember when he was rowing across the Atlantic and, he only had a satellite phone. It took 45 days and I never knew exactly when he was going to call. And I remember walking into a board meeting with our private equity firm and it was a huge meeting. We were presenting major investments in the company. And I remember sitting my phone on the table, which is something I never did then, just for, optics, energy, being present. And I sat it on the table and I said to the team, the founder of the private equity firm who was there and on our board of directors, the CEO, I said, if this phone rings a particular ring, I will exit very quickly. And, they were like, cool. We went on with the meeting. The phone didn't ring in the meeting. But afterward, the CEO pulled me aside and he goes, this must be something really special because I've never heard you even reference something like this in an environment like that. And I heard many comments like that from my team over the years. They were so happy for me. I was very caring and deeply into my team's family, but work was my life through that journey. And I was very happy that way. So it was just one of those where it's not just when you know, other people knew. And we didn't want to let that go. And so we proposed to each other within weeks.
I love that. When it comes to life, do you have any frameworks around big life changes?
Yeah, I have a few. One I published on my Substack years ago. I don't actively publish. It's just an archive for frameworks from back in the day. So if people ask, I can send them. And I call it money and resources ego and optics, and capabilities, 3 columns. So when I think about big life decisions or even big company decisions, I will often step back and ground myself in these 3 topics. So resources and financial. So if it's a job, you're thinking money, income, what do you need? What do you value and how are you valued? If it's a company investment decision or a merger or an acquisition, right? What's the financial setup here? What value does it add over time? So just grounding in the numbers. Resources that include, and sometimes in these cases, the lead filter is the financial dynamic. The second is ego and optics. How am I going to feel? So if you're taking a job or you're being asked to move or you're looking at an investment, how does it affect my sense of self? So for example, say something's a great financial opportunity, but are you proud of how they do what they do? For some people who are in the more traditional career journey, this might be, does a company need to be large or small for you to feel proud? Would you be an independent contributor if other things were solved for? Do you need to lead a big team to feel great about yourself? Does the company need to be well known or do you care? Right? These are things that affect your energy. Back to optimize for energy and how all in on that opportunity you're going to be. And it's a major consideration. None of these are singular. They are interconnected, but they should be considered in an isolated fashion for purity. So you really get honest about it. And then you start playing the connection game. And then the third is capabilities. Capabilities part A and part B. Part A, what are the capabilities that are strengths that I can bring to the table? So if it's a company that we're acquiring, what are the capabilities that we are acquiring? If it is a job, am I going to be able to make an impact with what are the skills where I objectively would be known to have a reputation to be good at these things? And then part B is the opposite. Learn, grow, complement, incrementality, right? If I'm buying a company that has a strength, I remember when we were buying Jamba Juice, publicly traded company, bringing it private, had started the smoothie juice movement, but lost its way. And there were real capabilities that we were buying. But there were also things we could bring to the table. We needed to reduce the sugar and bring more plant options and bring it to a more modern place. But it had 800 locations as the largest smoothie chain. And so that was accelerating our ability to bring a more healthful concept into our portfolio, which modernized the portfolio. And this is what hiring managers are looking for too. Where are you going to crush it? Because I'm looking for you to add value. And can you learn and grow here? Because I'm not hiring you for 1 minute, 1 day, or 1 year in most cases. And so resources and financial, optics and ego or affiliations, and then capabilities. And so I put any opportunity through those as a filter and then start looking at trade-offs because there always are.
What is one way that you think AI is going to impact the e-commerce world?
Oh, does it have to be only one? It is already affecting everything. First, I'll start obvious infrastructure. So what I'm seeing is AI enablement is following a very common path within mid to large scale companies. First, coming in and optimizing the customer experience in some way, customer service, customer happiness, data responsiveness, real-time automation agents, right? That check, we've gone down that path. Then there's supply chain, traceability, optimization, logistics, our partners, making sure they're bringing forward the best in intelligence to optimize their platform. So there's optimizing the operations of a company. It's here, it's happening, and it's everywhere. Then there's the part that's more fun and creative, the marketing, content, and creative side for ideation that then real craftspeople in creative can be inspired by to create concepts, ads, logos, packaging, right? There's so much exploration that can happen with the creative side of AI. But then I'll leap to customers of e-commerce, how they search, how they find information, what dots they connect across sellers and points of access. And then for us, on the supplement and nutrition side, the ability for AI, I hope, to continue to accelerate the supply chain that we helped pioneer, right? Higher QA standards, higher quality standards, third-party testing and certifications. That has been a highly manual, lengthy, deeply expensive endeavor. There is a reason premium high-quality products show up the way that they do and cost what they do, because that supply chain, that effort, that rigor, and having third parties has been tough to find, hard to do at scale, and very expensive. human trials. We've been investing in human clinical trials over the last several years to add on to the research behind ingredients. AI can now accelerate some of that and help the research side of the food, beverage, and health industry actually move a bit faster. And maybe that'll lower the cost basis for smaller companies getting into the space. We're fortunate. We're a big player. We make millions of dollars worth of investments here. I'm hoping AI will lower the cost and improve the access to the tools that improved safety, quality, and efficacy in this particular industry.
If that happens, I think not only the supplement industry, but broader healthcare will be in a much, much better place.
That's right.
So last question for you. I like to ask every one of my guests, if you were mayor of New York, what is one thing you'd change?
So tough. As someone who leads companies, those questions always weigh heavily because you never walk a mile in someone's shoes. It's always harder than it looks from the outside. So I'll have a little fun with it.
You won't take a bribe either from the Turkish.
That's right. No. Two things come to mind. One, in a more playful but serious way, it's New York, man. Like leveraging the great technology and talent here to provide access to the many answers the city might need feels like an unending opportunity. Back to leveraging AI and tools. So many people who are here permanently, temporarily, companies, founders, the ecosystem. Like, I don't know the degree to which the mayor of New York is leveraging those, but it probably could and should be more. And then on the more fun side, again, I don't know the stat of how many people move their bodies through New York's mass transit system. But as a health nut and someone running a nutrition company, we got to get healthier options in the train stations, in the subways. AG1 has automated vending retail now. We could get some AG1 vending machines. They're in airports popping up all over the country. But I don't know, giving a tax incentive for healthier food options in mass transit would be great for the people of New York.
I love that. Kat Cole, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.